What's up everyone, Mike here, back with another video. So today we're going to mix it up a little bit. The past few videos have really been around showcasing what's possible when you have an AI assistant speaking directly to your Drupal site via MCP to call tools from Tool API and start creating content, building content types, etc., etc. Today instead we're going to focus on step-by-step how you can get there on your own local environment. So let's get started. First, I'm going to make a couple of assumptions. One is that you have a local environment available. In my particular case, I'm going to be using DDEV, but you can really use anything that you're comfortable with. Just know that some of these initial steps will differ based on whatever you select. Additionally, I'm going to assume that you already have Claude Desktop set up, and we're not going to be walking through that process today. If you get lost in this first part where we're going to be installing Drupal CMS, you can search for Drupal CMS DDEV, and there's a really good tutorial on Drupal.org that I would encourage you to follow, which also includes steps for getting DDEV set up. We're going to jump to step 2, which is where we start to set up our specific site. I'm going to start out by creating a directory for our site. We're going to switch to our directory, and then I'm going to start running the commands that it has here. Great. And then we're going to say DDEV start. And while that's finishing, we're going to go ahead and copy the next command. Great. Now we're going to go ahead and create the Composer project with Drupal CMS. Awesome. And then we will call DDEV launch. So now we get the Drupal CMS install screen as well as some of the recipes that you can pick from. We're just going to pick a couple. You can use whatever you want. In our case, it will just be there for experimenting with assistant, an AI assistant, and MCP and tools. So, and then let's name our site. And then we just need to come up with a username and password. And make sure you remember what your password is, because we're going to just be using basic auth for connecting the assistant to MCP or via MCP to the site. And we'll let it finish the Drupal install and installing the recipes. And just like that, we have our Drupal CMS instance installed. So now let's start with the next step, and that's installing the Tool API and MCP. So first I'm going to jump over here to Tool API. You can always scroll down the page and find this, which makes it really easy to know what command to run. And we'll go back to our console, and we will tell it to include the latest alpha from Tool API. And then we're going to do the same for MCP. Great. And then we will go ahead and enable those. You can obviously do this from Drush, but I'm just going to show you on the module page. We'll do first the tool module. So you want to select the main Tool API module. You can skip the AI connector one if your goal is just to kind of sandbox with MCP and tools. AI connector is how you'd connect it to the AI suite, and that's when you want to start building agents using tools and things like that. And then these other modules are what provides tools specific to these subsystems. So we're going to go ahead and enable those, and then we will also want to enable the MCP modules. One thing I will call out is some of this might move. For example, this Tool MCP connector might actually just get moved right into MCP, so you won't need to install this. Separately. Additionally, we're talking about potentially moving the tools out of Tool API and letting Tool API just be an API. So it might be in that future that you download an additional module that gives you, the collection of all the different pre-built tools to choose from. So just be on the lookout for that, and we'll call that out on the Tool API page if that change occurs. So now that I've selected these, I'm going to go ahead and tell it to install. It needs to enable a few additional things. Okay, and now we will go ahead and proceed with configuring the modules. There's no configuration necessary for Tool API. Again, it's really supposed to just be a collection of tools and an API for building those tools on. There's no UI specific to it. So you want to focus on just configuring MCP. We'll go to the MCP configuration. We're going to start with authentication, which we want to enable. And in our case, we just want to do basic auth. So I'm going to go in here, click save. Then we're going to jump over to this plugins tab. I'm going to actually turn some of these off because I really just want to highlight Tool API, but you can have those available as well if you want. So we're going to go to general MCP, turn that off, go to content, turn that off. Trash commands, and I'm going to turn that off as well. And then we'll come down here and check into Tool API. It's enabled. Allowed roles, I would just leave this alone. One thing I should note with tools and Tool API is they actually have their own access check based on the user that you're authenticated with. So it's going to respect the permissions of the user that you have connected to your assistant. You also don't need to mess with any of these settings here. Custom description is really if you want to override some of the descriptions that tools provide by default. But ultimately, the goal of Tool API was to describe tools well enough that you shouldn't need to do this unless you're trying to do something unique to your instance. Allowed roles, again, I would leave this alone. Another thing I do want to mention is by default, any tools that are added are enabled by default, which I think will probably change in the future because the idea that you've installed a module that provides a new tool and you don't even realize that you've made that available through MCP is not something that I think is probably where we want to be in the future. So it'll probably be something where you're going to be opting tools in versus taking tools out. So we'll go in here, just make sure we're good. Okay, and then the next step is to actually go into connection information. And in our case, we're going to be setting this up with Claude Desktop. So we can click into that. You'll note here, it'll actually tell you the file you want to add this to, but I'm going to show you another way to get there. So if you open up Claude, and then we can go into our settings. And we'll say, in our case, click edit config. It's going to take you to that file. If you do this, one thing I want to mention is you should close Claude because sometimes what will happen is you make the changes to those settings and Claude ends up actually overriding them. So close it. Open it up in the editor of your choice, and then we are going to, I just need this. I mean, you obviously want all these settings, but I just need the MCP server settings. We'll do this actually. Okay, and I'll come back to this file and go to MCP server. And then before closing this out and saving, you'll want to go into here and the username, if you've just installed Drupal CMS the same way I had it, will be admin. Obviously, you can go to your users and check it. And then your password is whatever the password you put in, which mine is very simple in this use case. Great. We can close this. Now we can reopen Claude and we should be ready to go. So we'll start it back up. If you don't see any errors or warnings here, that's a pretty good sign that it connected successfully. That would just really come in if there's a misconfiguration or there's some error bug on your Drupal instance where it just can't even instantiate it and get a list of tools. But then to confirm that it's connected, you can just ask it to give you a list of tools. Tools available. And it's then actually ping your Drupal site and get a list of those tools and display them. Awesome. And one thing I should mention here is if you add new tools, I believe right now you will need to close Claude and re-add them. Additionally, if you change tools, same thing. If you change the definition of them or the inputs, outputs, whatever it may be, you'll need to close it and restart it. There's not a dynamic refresh that I know of that's been implemented on the Drupal side yet. But I do know that's available in MCP, and hopefully that's something we can implement soon. So we should be all good to go on this connection at this point. You can now start using the assistant to make calls directly to the Drupal site. This could be creating content, editing content, adding content translations. It could also be more on the configuration side. So building out content types, vocabularies, adding fields to them, editing fields, deleting fields, whatever it may be. We're going to continue rolling out a lot more tools, but at the same time, there's a lot of focus right now on getting Tool API to a beta so that we know things won't be changing as drastically. I will say pretty confidently that I don't expect the API for the tool definition themselves to change too significantly between now and the beta. So if you want to start building tools on top of it, yes, there may be a few things that we tweak or change, but for the most part, you can safely start expanding and building your own tools to try with this. If you do run into issues in the meantime, throw them into the issue queue. It's always very helpful to be able to garner, whether it be bugs, tasks, ideas, whatever it may be. Additionally, if you just have general comments or ideas or feedback, throw them into the YouTube comments below. Find me on LinkedIn, find me on Slack, whatever it may be. I'm pretty excited to see this in the hands of more people and really see what they can do with it. So thanks again for joining me today, and excited to see where this goes from here.